I am so excited to have this conversation today. There has been immense change in the world in such a short period of time that I'm actually finding these conversations to be absolutely critical. And I know there is a sea of information out there right now that everyone is getting hit with, but we're really trying to hone in on what matters right now and equipping you and your team with the right information and tools. So today we're going to look at how do we navigate the new normal? And what does it mean to look at the human side of change? Now, more than ever, people are looking to their leaders for guidance and a strong sense of security and direction, which is why I am so thrilled to be having this conversation with 4 of our highly invested M Moser leaders that are helping to change the workplace reentry landscape from a place of confusion to clarity in a very practical and transparent way. So firstly, we have Nabil Sabet, Group Director of North America, joining us. And I'm very happy to be sharing the moderator role with him, as Nabil will be asking our speakers questions as well throughout the second part of the webinar. Joining us from San Francisco, Elfrida Chan, Senior Associate of Workplace Strategy. Joining us all the way from London is Associate Workplace Strategist Francis Gain. And joining us from New York, we have Senior Associate of Workplace Strategy, Grant Christofoli. Welcome to all of you amazing speakers. Now, I know our audience is very eager to hear what you have to say, so I'm going to pass the torch to Nabil to get us started. Take it away, Nabil.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you all for joining. I can see that we have a real mix of real estate, HR, and operation executives today on the call. It's really great to have you all here with us. And I'm sure you're all feeling at this time severe time crunch. Time is very much of the essence right now, and I'm sure, like many of our clients, you're drawing up tremendous plans to return back to work in some way, shape, or form. And so while you're doing this, it's not just about the physical spaces you're all experiencing. We need to really consider the needs of our colleagues. And that's why today we're really talking about the human side of change. You know, it's really not as simple as creating a safer work environment and just jamming people back in. Last webinar, we spoke about those physical changes, the infrastructure change that we can do on the MEP side, the physical changes we can do in terms of the space itself, and even some of the operations changes that we can do in terms of teaming. And today is really looking at what are those other aspects? What are those things that we need to do to allow our people to move in the most comfortable manner? And the reason we do this is because our team really looks at the work environment as 3 different parts. First, we have the physical space, which is the interiors, the architecture, and all those physical things that we experience. But we also believe that the social environment, the culture, the operating system, and the digital and technological tools all need to work together in concert. And so for us, these 3 aspects are really inseparable. And that's why today we're really focusing on those other aspects that we didn't touch last time, the social environment and the digital and technological tools. So to take us through today, we're going to go through first looking at the steps we need to carry out in parallel or even before we move in. Second, we want to navigate the different employee experiences and expectations that they may have. We have to have a mechanism to manage the change that they're going through during this transition. And finally, we're going to look at the technology and tools that can hopefully help ease this transition back into the workplace. I'm joined today with a few of my very dear colleagues, and we're going to touch on all these non-physical aspects of re-entering the workspace. I'm going to pass it on to Danielle now to take us forward.
Awesome, Nabil. Thank you so much. Now I want to turn it to Francis. So Francis, to get us really oriented, can you please tell us why it's so important to look at the human side of change?
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, Nabil. Yeah, the human side of change. What change? Of course, we're talking about re-entry. And by the human side, we mean seeing that through the lens of your employees. We've done hygiene, we've done space, and now this really focuses on people and their experience. We can refurb an office over the weekend. We've done that. But it's behavior that takes time. It's people who are tricky. Why? Well, it's double trouble. We need to win over both hearts and minds. For real transformation, engagements, employee trust, we need to sell to the brain. We can do that by painting a picture of logic and more than ever of safety and secure that irrational side of each employee. But at the same time, and possibly more importantly, we need to capture the heart or the emotional side, because ultimately emotion is going to win. It can inspire, it can motivate, or it can do the opposite. In a nutshell, employees need to both feel the benefits of change and understand it. So with some planning, with empathy, clear communications, you can lead even the most resistant employees towards lasting and rewarding change. And that's the goal. That's the goal today, that's the goal always, because it's people that make the business.
Thank you, Frances. That's a great start. Now, diving a little deeper, Elfreda, can you give us a quick overview of where we are now with the workplace and where we are going?
Danielle, you worded your question really interestingly, and I want to make sure that I'm responding to this in the right way. First of all, workplace right now is basically wherever you are in your home, whether that's on your couch, at your dining table, or if you're lucky enough at a desk. That's where we are today. But I know what you're trying to ask is really about that physical premises of where a business has been operating up until this point, that type of workplace. So if you remember from webinar 1, Nabil actually touched upon this briefly. We see 2 phases of the future workplace. The first phase being reentry, which is what everyone is talking about right now. This immediate future of once shelter in place and lockdowns have been lifted and people go back, how do we maintain an environment that is safe for everyone? And the second one being rethink, which is the longer term opportunity and future state that has been unlocked because of the skills that we have learned through working from home and remote from everyone else. So we've actually been working with our clients. We've set up some rapid response task forces to help our clients implement the safety measures for reentry. And a lot of this we talked about in our previous webinar. Implementing antimicrobial mats, getting those thermometer checks in place, purchasing hand sanitizer, replanning the office layout so that it's clear where people should and should not sit. And we're doing this in a design and procure method so that it's fast enough and we can actually go and source all of those things to put in place. And it's really about finding solutions that are quick to deploy, relatively cost effective, with the mindset that this is temporary. On the rethink side, we've started brainstorming with our clients of what that might actually look like. This is something that really excites me, and I know Nabil, Grant, and Francis all feel the same way. Maybe just 8 weeks ago, this was something that some of our clients didn't think possible. I was jokingly talking about how workplace right now is your couch and your dining table, but really this has an effect on the future. So some things that we've been investigating are, do you have people that continue to work from home in future? Is it permanent or is it, part of a rotation cycle? Some of the surveys that we've launched externally on a global scale and also internally within M Moser have indicated that people are interested. I mean, I'm personally interested in some sort of working from home policy moving forward. And what this does is it affects the footprint that these physical premises are going to take. And with that, it gives a potential for businesses to save on real estate and maybe use that money to spend on things like home kits, giving your people ergonomic task chairs, extra monitors, paying for their internet perhaps, and maybe even their phones to enable people to stay connected. There's a real benefit there. Other ideas that we've been playing around with and exploring with clients is having dynamic work environments. Having a personal desk has always meant that you're sitting in a cesspool of germs because janitorial staff are told not to clean those environments because of personal effects. So moving to a dynamic work environment enables better sanitization practices. The other thing to remember is that we're social creatures and we all want to be together. I think there are so many people that just want to go back to work. Our surveys are definitely showing us that. And so I think the role of the office is going to change. Before it was about where you did everything, including the most tactical individual work, all the way to, just having a coffee with someone. I think it's really going to become this place that is a physical manifestation of your company's culture so that people can remember why they're part of this mission and this goal and this vision that a business has. And it's also going to be a place that can bring people together, whether that is in the form of collaborative spaces so that you can rub shoulders with your teammate to work on something side by side, or maybe there's going to be team rooms that groups of people can book and work together for a set duration of time, which a cleaning crew can then come in and wipe it all down so that another group can come in and use it for another day.
Now, Elfrida, what are those steps before carrying out the physical change that leaders need to implement right now?
So the things we need to do prior to re-entry are three main things. The first one is have those necessary discussions on whether re-entry at this time is even right for the business and for the people. And in order to do that, it's important to take a pulse of everyone's experience, whether that's through a survey or having team leaders interact with their people on a one-to-one. Gathering that insight allows for a more informed decision. The key here is really being as informed as you possibly can be about how people are coping, what their fears are, what their hesitations might be, so that, when you do make that decision, you are equipping your workplace and your people with everything that they need. The second thing is, okay, say you decide that re-entry is the right thing to do, determining the right groups who would benefit from re-entry. So through those insights, you should be able to start formalizing the different profiles, whether it's people that have long commutes, or if their work needs, they're quote unquote essential workers in the sense that they need to be in the office in order to get any work done. I was actually just talking to my husband the other day, and he said that their group is functioning just fine. They're being productive. They're working remotely. They're connecting. They're really not experiencing very much impact at all. And to them, the thought of even going back is just like, well, do we even need to bother? And this is great if there are groups that can do this, but as a business leader and as an organization, it's important to then assess, okay, what does this mean for the greater group? Do we start creating silos all over again, where functions are actually operating and not interacting with each other? Pre-COVID, a lot of conversations in workplace strategy was about bringing cross teams together in some way. And that is what workplace will continue to be and should be. So, it's one thing to know that people can do it, but it's another to have a position as a business as to, what are we really trying to achieve here with re-entry or without it. The third point is then to map out that return journey, right? Figure out that change strategy. How do you disseminate information to who and when? To make sure that they know what they need to do when they return to the office, and have that workplace strategy in place. really start working out with firms like ourselves on what that might look like, whether it's this, the safety protocols at reentry, or even the further look ahead on Rethink.
I think something to add into that, Alfredo, when you're talking about that return strategy, I think it's so true. It's understanding, who's going to return and why. And that really may play a big role in how we design to it. We met with one client now who was looking at rotational staff. So they have offices and they want to keep that going, but it's a 2-person office now, and they're looking at making it rotational. So it becomes a 1-person office for, person A on Wednesday, but for person B on Thursday. And how do we make that rotation work? And how do we make it safe? That more people are able to flow through the workplace, but at different times with like a staggered design and response. I think that there's another sort of layer. I think I like that, Alfredo was talking about the bigger questions, like the macro question of, do we actually return? Are we just doing it because the government says go and our neighbor is doing it? So I think there's that bigger question there. And then there's obviously the approach to it. But I think it then funnels down to the employees themselves and what are they looking to get out of the workplace if and when they return.
Great, Francis. I totally agree. Now, how do you suggest leaders find out what their employees want and are expecting if and when they return to the workplace, or even when working both remotely and in the office?
I would start first by taking a step back, understanding that we're all coming from very different experiences, and that will bring a range of expectations. Some employees are literally going to be running back to the office, while others are already resisting. On a more practical side, I would definitely recommend a survey. It's 8 minutes of your staff's time, but with long-lasting impact. It'll give you some quick, easy evidence that will inform your re-entry strategies and eventually your rethink practices. You need a few targeted questions such as what initiatives could ease your concerns, or what are you expecting to change in the workplace on your return, and so on. And then if set up properly, the software can gather hundreds of insights and spit it out into one neat executive summary. And then the third part is understanding the rotations. It's understanding when and how your employees will return. And that's going to take some phasing, some mapping. It's about grouping people together, either by team or by function or by desired behavior within the workplace. We aren't going to bring everyone back at once, and we all have different reasons to be in the workplace. So it's really important that the company can capture those. So for example, you may have a rotational by team. So on days Monday and Wednesday, team A comes in, they're able to connect. On the other days, team B comes in. However, you might have employees who are wanting to focus in the workplace. You might have other employees who are wanting to connect, to be loud and buzzy. And with a workplace at 20% capacity, you're all going to be together making that work. So perhaps you have days of focus and days of collaboration. And then you need to order who comes when and how.
Now, I've heard you talk about this quite a bit, and it's very intriguing. So can you tell us also how working from home or shelter in place has given people autonomy?
Work from home brought many organizations and individuals a greater sense of autonomy. Autonomy in that they've had choice about how to work, where to work within their home, and at what comfort levels, and so on. And it's brought them a feeling of self-governance. And that has really impacted motivation, and that impacts productivity. A author that I really admire, Daniel Pink, in his book Drive, says that the 3 pillars of motivation are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And in a way, we're seeing all three of those come alive in this lockdown work from home period, if you're being supported well by your company. And we know that with motivation comes productivity, and productivity comes profit. And we've seen in our surveys that 2/3 of employees are feeling that their productivity or their individual productivity has improved. And that's huge. We're in a global pandemic with lots of additional stresses and strains, yet people are feeling their productivity has increased. So for companies to challenge that autonomy by pushing a decision would be a pity. Of course, there are very valid, very real reasons to come back to the workplace. But the best thing we can recommend as a group of strategists is for the company to think why, how, and when before trigger action into a return.
Right. So this has been a tremendous upskilling experience for everybody. So I wonder, what is the profound ramification when everyone has a skill that they once thought took a very long time to integrate? You know, we are now addressing the new norm. This new skill is the new norm. So if that's something everyone can have, how do we design a workplace now? What things do people need at home? And the obvious question now is, how do we combine them? I'm just super curious and excited to explore this further with you guys. And I think, Grant, you have a point around this upskilling, so I'd love to hear what you think.
Yes, I completely agree. There's a skill that has been gained. And I think people are like, whoa, it's like almost like learning to walk and you didn't know you could walk, right? It's like, whoa, I can do this. And some people are happier than others, and that's going to be the case with everything. And this isn't obviously like the normal case. There will be some rebalancing, obviously. But what I would add is that there's a huge emotional factor to this, that actually that's the change that still has to occur. Being forced to do something is not really like a normal condition, especially in the societies we live in. So I think that that's the thing that hasn't been accounted for. And so what's really interesting is how organizations make decisions about what their future course will be, based on it, which will very much be based on emotion rather than the skill that they now know everyone has.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I have this straight. So what you're saying is, while there has been upskilling and a transformation of how people work, the emotional components that go along with this and support it have not yet caught up. And so what leaders and their workplaces can do is actually bolster, strengthen, reinforce those elements. And it's those elements that are also necessary for long-term, sustainable work in various different modes. Do I have that right?
Yeah, long-term transformation. Yeah, it's reinforcing them. It's like watching my toddler learn how to walk, right? At first, they're a little bit shocked that they know how to do this, but it gets them further. And then as a parent, kind of have to remind them, this is great. You can come here now and get the ball. And now he realizes that walking is amazing.
Yeah, that's so true, Alfreda. Absolutely. And what does nimble look like in business? From my experience, I'd say that's being aware, responsive. It's those teams who can see the blind spots and then change quickly. Even if that's a 360-degree pivot, this needs really engaged leadership, business resilience, and a general agility.
This nimbleness sounds a lot like empathy. And so you're describing the need to be nimble, the need to look at individuals. It sounds to me like it's another way of describing some form of organizational empathy. How is that deployed on scale? I mean, I could be empathetic to my family members. I could be empathetic to my circle of friends. what do I do if there's 100 or 1,000 people or even more?
It goes back to the point where most people don't thrive in uncertainty. Most people do not know how and what they should be doing next, and they need a leader to help them through that. And that's why, getting a pulse of their current experience, through surveys or getting leaders like team leaders to meet with their groups and having a more personal one-on-one conversation, somehow understanding what people are thinking and feeling. And then as an organization, responding through actually recommendations, protocols, maybe like a list of etiquette when they're in the office, something that's much more, this is how you should do it. And this is how you should decide if you are coming in. Because an individual probably is finding it hard to balance between, well, I don't feel safe, but I also want to go in because I want to do work, but I don't know if this is the right thing to do. And I don't know if the organization is, going to help me. Instead of trying to help each individual go through that cyclical questioning, is just providing some sort of guidance, almost like a flow chart, like a thought process flow chart. It's like, what are you feeling more today? If you feel that you need to get work done and it's taking a higher priority, then you should go in. It can't be mandated because then you're going against someone's feelings, especially about safety. But somehow the organization needs to help them go through that thought process.
Mm-hmm. How do we scale empathy in an organization?
Yeah, so I've been listening to what everyone's saying. So I think that there are different leadership modes required for different points in an organization. I mean, what we're dealing with right now is a bit of crisis management. And while I agree actually with both Francis and Elfrida, I think, it's instead of, I guess, relying on methods of disseminating information, it's about arming people with the right tools to be adaptive over time. You really don't want to teach someone a new behavior. You want to teach them how to change so that the next time there's a new behavior, because there will always be a next time because things constantly change, you really want to teach them how to do the change and how to adapt so that you don't actually have to ever teach someone something again, that they can always adapt. You actually have to speak to everyone in different ways. And so something that actually I will touch on is that there is a methodology of communicating in which it's actually meant for marketing, but I think we use it in our own change approach often, is that you actually use different platforms to reach different audiences. And in this case, the audiences aren't like different types of people in different locations or generations. It might be actually, but it's actually people it's different types of learning and different types of absorption methods, because really what we're trying to do is teach. And what that does is A, you actually get the message to the person. B, you can repeat the message and it won't fall flat. And C, you've talked to the person like a human being. They receive the information in a kinder way, which makes them more open to hearing it. And it makes them feel like, oh, actually, I know how I can change. I know what I'm supposed to do. And so everything that I'm talking about can be applied to any situation, really. But I would argue that re-entry is a harder, difficult time to do that because of the nature of the information and what is actually trying to be achieved during this time, which is, I would say, also to Elfrida's point, a little bit more, or maybe it was Francis's point, a little bit more command control. It's a little bit more saying, okay, we've made decisions that are for the good and the safety of everyone. We're going to arm you with the right information. Here's the protocol. And now we're going to also arm you with the tools to have a coordinated effort across our organization, which is a bit different from Rethink, where you're trying to create a new normal. re-entry is not about creating a new normal. It's about creating safety for a limited period of time.
One of the things that I find quite fascinating is the need to, you're describing the need to be heard, and actually how much of a role that plays in the safety of the employee. So maybe the action and the recourse could be different, but the act of being the act of being heard actually has, in its own way, profound effects on the employee's experience. I also heard you say that in times of great need, there is an element of decisive decision making, based on good information, but that the capacity is distributed to a wider group of people to enact. So when thinking of how do we create an empathetic organization at scale, it almost sounds, from pulling all your information together, it sounds like there are decisions that need to be made with good, sound information, but there needs to be a way to pass on that engagement mode to different line managers, supervisors, and really break down a larger organization into smaller bits that could be managed by people, and then equipping those people with the tools, the practices that would allow them to then engage their team members. Does that kind of resonate?
Yeah,
That's what I think. That's why I called it the distributed control and centralized coordination, because that's essentially what you're doing. You can't have it just one point of control.
Yeah, I think I've talked to you about this, Nabil, and maybe Elfrida as well. There's a book called Team of Teams. It's by a gentleman named Stanley McChrystal. He was a general in the Army. He's now retired. He's written a book about how the military actually in the Middle East had to adapt to the different ways of combat, and the distributed network that the U.S. military was facing in the Middle East, which was very different from the very hierarchical command control nature of the U.S. military in leading up to the early 2000s. So they had to adapt and actually give more tools and more decision-making power to the troops on the ground, and have everything feed back rather than to be distributed out from a central point. So it was actually turning the network arrow basically around, and saying that you have to make decisions based on information that you have on the ground, and let us know what you've done. So I think it has to happen somewhat similarly in very large organizations, because everyone's going to be facing something a little bit differently, and it can be very difficult for a singular group of people to make all of the decisions, again, for a very large organization. Even if you think about our own organization, each location is creating their own strategy informed by a central strategy determined in a singular location. So we take that information, we basically translate it to our own needs, and then we disseminate that information to our own people who might have questions or may need it presented to them in different ways so that they can absorb and understand and really perform at their best.
So, Grant, this is fascinating, and you described a lot of organizational tools that could be deployed to allow team leaders, organization heads to deploy and to engage their people. But I think the other side of that may be physical tools. And would you be able to maybe share a bit more about the physical tools that we currently have in the workspace, how, whether they're technology or physical, how do they, what role do they play? And are we even using them correctly?
Right. So I think that that's a really good question. So the first thing that I would definitely say is don't overcomplicate it. We often have a tendency to try to apply every tool we can find for every little need that we have, when many of the tools that we're already paying for, or that we have in our wheelhouse, or that people know well, do really amazing things. We're just not leaning into them well enough, or we haven't been onboarded properly enough to them. And that applies to space and technology. So there's kind of three layers, I would say, to this. I'll start with the basics. So there are tools that we need in order to perform tactically, right? And so if I talk about physical tools, that would be ergonomic seating, a work surface, monitors, choice. I think some of the things that Elfrida touched on were really important as we're in this time. Is we're all familiar with these things in the physical workplace, but something that organizations have started to do even before COVID-19, but certainly I think we'll see after, is investing in home offices. Many organizations might not be in a position to do that, so actually something that we did as a team, as a workplace strategy team in New York, is actually started an Amazon shopping list to say to everybody, hey, these are the things that actually are the coolest or the best items you could buy for your home office. They're affordable and they're approved. And it actually gave people a bit of a guiding light to say, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I'll actually invest in this for myself because I want to be healthy, or my back hurts because I've been sitting on my couch. I think that those are the things, just really simple tactical items that you can do. And in terms of tactical items for digital, I think the thing that we have seen the most success with, not only in our organization, but across other organizations, are really strong cloud infrastructure and shared online tools. So whether it's Google Drive or Office 365 or Dropbox or whatever platform you want to use, I mean, I don't think any of them necessarily are perfect or right for any one organization. But whatever you end up using, I think it's really important that people understand how they can use those tools to collaborate with one another. The second category, I would say, is about communication and co-creation. And this kind of bleeds into what I was talking about with shared tools. But I think we all have access to tools like Teams, Slack, Facebook at Work, Google Chat. Again, it doesn't really matter which one. I think all of these are really great and have their own features. But it's not really about the chat function of these, which is probably the thing that we all use most. It goes beyond that. It's really about fostering transparency, fostering co-creation. So using these tools to be able to create together will really enhance people's sense of purpose and really enhance the sort of meaning behind working remotely and really making the collaboration real, and the collaboration we may have been used to in the physical environment really real. What it also does is it enables a blended environment. So some people might be working remote, some might end up going back to the workplace pretty soon, but you can still actually work together using these tools. So I think that's really important to lean into those co-creation tools that we may already be using. And then finally, connection. So this is actually something unique that I wanted to touch on. M Moser has actually started developing, and we've developed an app. So there's many platforms out there that do a little bit of everything, and they're amazing software out there. One of our aims was to create a digital space that replicates the benefits of our own physical assets. So things like people, annual reviews, feedback, room and space booking, current events, new hires, expenses, all of these things kind of under one roof. And that might sound a little chaotic, but really the intent was to capture the essence of the experience of being at work into a digital space so that we could bridge the gaps between when we're working remote and when we're in the office into one place. And this really puts your operating system on display, and it connects people to the organization in a new way.
Grant, you told me this story about your husband who was experiencing tools that he had used for a long time, but was finally unleashing kind of new capabilities. And
Absolutely. So he's a director of operations for a charter high school in Harlem. And they're a pretty new organization, so they're pretty heavily invested in the G Suite. And so all of their tools are, as many of you might be familiar, very connected and shareable and collaborative. But we were about a week into our remote work experience, and he said to me, you know, the most profound thing that's happening right now is that I have people who, you know, might be a little bit older, but some of them are, you know, are just starting their careers as well, who are actually having to upskill and create shared documents and, you know, teach whole classrooms full of kids remotely using these tools. And they were people before who had trouble sending an email. So I thought that was so kind of profound. I mean, it's not even a work experience that I had, but I thought it was so profound in that those tools had been available to the organization for several years. I mean, nothing changed about the actual tools. No new tools were applied, but it's that need, you know, forced people to learn the tools, to upskill, to actually think about new ways of applying those tools to our changing conditions. And it really doesn't matter if it's G Suite or Office 365 or any other tool. It really just matters that people are diving into those tools and taking advantage of any tool and what it has to offer.
do you think that there's a need for the internal IT and for the workplace team to work in a more organized and concerted manner than ever before?
So definitely, you know, some of the organizations we work with have technology under their jurisdiction. Many others do not. Something actionable today, something that can happen literally after you're finished listening to us speak, is that no matter your organizational structure, start working with your cross-functional partners to create change. So whether it's HR, technology, or finance, start a dialogue. Have a conversation. It doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to necessarily result in anything today. But I think the most successful change we see is when functional partners come together in a unified direction. We often act as the bridge between these groups for many organizations, many of our client organizations, to ask the right questions and to build a common mission for the organization or for those functional organizations. So we're happy and really excited to work on this with anybody that is listening in today.
Well, I think just to elaborate on what Grant was saying, or in a response to that, it's the tools and the skills and sort of the business case to use them. But I think it's also about fluency and knowing and comfort. You know, we've been fluent at being at the workplace for a while. It took a long time to get people out of their offices and get familiar with being in the open plan. But as soon as you get to a level of comfort, you can really take ownership of that new experience and reside within that. And I think that's often what happens with the digital tools is, you know, we've had people who've been really uncomfortable with even the idea of WhatsApp, let alone talking on Teams. And as soon as they got that sort of digital intelligence and comfort, they're able to now, you know, expand into collaborative software. I had someone, you know, working in online Excel, whereas I didn't even think he knew how to, you know, send an SMS.
And do you think this will have then a return effect? This digital fluency will have a return effect on, you know, the future of workplace.
Yeah, because I think we've looked at, you know, areas of workplace that actually are responding to types of workers. You know, we've had the factory worker and literally the factory. We've now had the knowledge worker, and we brought in the behavioral-based design and a more choice-based, variety-based workplace. So we've gone from IQ to EQ, and now we're going to sort of BQ and understanding that digital world and being comfortable in that fluid world of digital and physical. And that'll just open us up into a bigger and better future, I think, and a more dispersed future where we can be working on the train, we can be working at home, we can be in the workplace. We've been really, really creative in our response to lockdown and to shutdown. We've invented these completely different things about, virtual happy hours and Strava running groups, and we felt many people more connected than ever. And I think either Grant or Alfreda picked up on that. And we've responded with a creativity because we've had such limitations, and it's been such a sort of hyped global experience, and how we need to continue that kind of discovery and that kind of, curious response with new solutions and so on. And this isn't the end of that. This isn't that we've closed the book and we now move back. We've got to kind of blur that and pick up on that energy and that creative problem solving.
Thank you, Frances. Yes, it's so true. Really, it's in these times of uncertainty and all this change that we have to get extremely creative and use creativity as a way to move forward. And before we close out today, there's a lot of information that we've shared in this webinar. I want to encourage you all to lean into our team and see how we can support you. Our team is here. We're multifaceted, and we really want to make this tangible for everyone today. So what I thought we could do is really just list out some of the relevant ways we can support you in this moment. So really starting from, before we return to the office, looking at things like re-entry advisory, the implementation of those plans, the design of those ideas, and what we can do to get a safer work environment, and ultimately even procurement if you need support in that respect. Any kind of staff polling and surveys, supporting your internal communications about change. And if your team is looking at bigger and broader and more profound effects of COVID and all that we're going through on your workplace, even creating roadmaps for you about reentry and also the rethinking of workplace. So any kind of support we can provide you in terms of rethinking your future state of work would be something we would love to be part of and can support you greatly. Secondly, navigating employee expectations and managing the change. Everything from workplace assessments on how to increase safety in your space, but also looking at your existing circulation and how we can map that around and make it more efficient, high risk zones, and looking at all the different types of spaces internally and how we can make those more effective, all the way from design through to protocols. So we're there to help you. And finally, the technology and tools is something that will ease the transition, but will also hopefully be something that can continue into the future. So if you do need support from us in your cross-departmental meetings to kind of outline and maybe even facilitate some of the conversations between HR, technology, and other stakeholders, we would love to be part of that. We do this all the time. We have our own platform that we're developing and have rolled out in several occasions already. Our community app, and that can be used as a method of communication, but also bringing people together now that we're both in physical and non-physical environments working from home. So that, as well as any kind of change management support that you may need to assist your team's employees, both physically and mentally from a psychological safety perspective, to ease the transition back into the work environment. So thanks everyone for being here today. We're extremely grateful. I'm going to pass it on to Danielle now.
All right, so we do have to wrap up now, but if you'd like to continue this conversation, please follow us on LinkedIn and our other social media platforms, and also feel free to email us at the contact shown on the screen here. And please submit your final questions in your questions tab now so that we can get in touch with you and reach out to you directly after this webinar. Again, thank you so much to our speakers who have shared their wisdom and have not only given us next steps and practical tools, but I feel they've also given us hope and a nudge in the right direction. And I want to extend a thank you to our wonderful audience. Thank you all for joining in on this conversation today. We'll talk to you soon, and of course, be well.